Welcome to the Voice of Many podcast show with your host, Yolanda, and co-host, Vanessa. Our guest today is Sue Bowles. She is a survivor turned award-winning author, speaker, and master certified professional coach. She leads a My Step Ahead, an organization that is committed to breaking the stigma around mental health struggles. And I love her slogan, you only have to be a step ahead of a person. A step ahead, I'm sorry about that. A step ahead to help the person that is behind you, which I think is very touching, very deep. And I want to say to you, thank you, Sue, for overcoming your different battles and challenges that you've had in life. And welcome to the show, Sue. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you. Thank you, Yolanda and Vanessa.
Okay.
Too many Y's in a row there. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate that. So
you're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. And if you will, Sue, just briefly share with those that are listening, those that are watching, a little bit about your story, and we'll jump in it from there, okay?
sure. I do want to give a quick trigger warning. What I'm going to share here in a second does have to do with some sexual assault, has to do with some eating disorders. So if those are topics that maybe little ears are around and you don't want them to be hearing it, or if it's a trigger for you, please have a self-care plan in place. And if you need to shut the show off and come back to it later, that's totally fine too. It'll be sitting there waiting for you. So yeah. Having said that, my story took a pretty crazy turn when I was 7 years old. I didn't have a chance to really even figure out what it meant to be a kid when a classmate of mine raped me after school one day. I was 7 years old in first grade. And as if that wasn't enough, the boy's last words to me were, "Don't tell anybody." And I didn't for 15 years. And I didn't tell anyone until my senior year of college. So, it's scientifically known that trauma does literally rewire your brain and how your brain processes things. Mm-hmm. So I was at a very critical, what they call the age of knowledge. And, here I was 7 years old and my brain was really just starting to develop. And already it went into fight or flight or survive mode. And that is what got me through my preteen years, my teenage years, which are already tumultuous, at college, which is a hotbed of stress. So by the time I got to college, I used the word troubled. I was an emotional mess, and I hadn't put all the parts together at that point in time. In addition to that, because of all those things, and I didn't know how to deal with emotions. So I was imploding constantly. When I was in 8th grade, someone signed my yearbook to the girl who's always mad. And I didn't realize how true, how accurate that was. She saw something that I couldn't put a finger on yet. So I had anger issues. I had connection issues. I had self-image issues. I was trying to find my worth by being involved and being seen. By the time when I was in high school, I was suicidal at one point in time. When by the time I got to college, I had developed an eating disorder. And I hadn't even put that word together and even owned that really until 2016. So we're talking just 6 years ago for that. And, and this is over 4 decades after everything. So there has been a lot of trauma and a lot of loss in my story. My parents divorced after 34 years of marriage. My brother had to serve 18 months in prison for a drunk driving accident. And yet we've seen good come from all of those. And I'm not saying any of those were good, but I'm saying good has come from them. And now those events help me be able to relate to so many more people where I can be more effective in helping them on their journeys, no matter what the cause of their struggle. I can take what I have learned and experienced and help them so that I can live out my step ahead, so that I can help the person behind me take their next step while I'm still reaching out for help to deal with my story in different aspects.
I wonder, how did you recover and heal from the sexual assault? Because I know personally it takes a long time for
Mhm.
you to get to where you can accept what has happened and then trying to heal from then on.
Yeah, that has been and continues to be a journey. Um, you know, when I say I didn't tell anybody to my senior year of college, to put it with a little scope to this, that was a decade and a half since the event
Mhm.
before I even came out about it and told someone. And even then, it wasn't planned. There was a book, this book called "The Body Keeps the Score," and the body will remember anything that's going on, even if your brain has tried to shut it off, and it
Mhm.
comes out through your body. And that's where the eating disorder came in. That's where through all these different things came in. And my first step to healing was telling somebody. And again, I didn't know it needed to come out. My dean of students at college had become my confidant, kind of my counselor. My senior year, he changed from dean of students to his vice president for advancement position. He was still available to me. He also knew he had a troubled student who wasn't really ready for the workforce. So he gave me different homeworks to work on. And so it helped me so I could see in front of me what was going on in my mind, because I hadn't really been able to put that together. We were going over the homework one day, and I do not remember the question he asked. I do remember that I was staring at his carpet and, inspecting the weave of his carpet is how I phrase it. And I started off on some kind of monologue that ended with the statement, well, when society tells you not to say anything. And he was very astute, and he kind of paused and said, "Sue, did somebody hurt you?" I said, "Yeah." And he asked if it was my parents, and I said, "No." And he asked if it was someone else. I acknowledged that. And he asked who, and asked what happened. That was the first step to my healing, was being brave enough to share my story, even when I didn't know it needed to be shared. And that started things. Now, again, that was 15 years after the event. Fast forward, literally, trying to do some quick math here, 40 years, 4 decades since I made that statement, and I still had not fully dealt with it. I became involved in a retreat program called Walking Stick Retreats. It's a Christian retreat, and it is a safe place where we can just be. And through the course of some different events, it started out from a movie that had come out. I went to this retreat, and it was the year that I was working with my counselor. It's 2014, and we were just starting to deal with the rape. All these years later, and I'm just starting to deal with something that happened in the early 70s. And I was imploding, you know, going back to my emotions were frozen in time when I was raped. I didn't know how to deal with them, the eating disorder. And I was imploding. I had it all coming at me at the same time. And I went to this retreat, and I went in calling myself, not necessarily verbally, but I've learned that I had the attitude that I was the holy exception. Again, I'm a Christian, so I look at it from a biblical perspective. And for me, I was saying that everything in the Bible was good enough for everybody else but me, because I was too screwed up, too far gone, too much had happened, that I was a waste of space. And I went in with that attitude, and I left a couple days later being able to say for really the first time in my life and starting to believe that Jesus Christ loves me. And he not only loves me, he likes me. Like, there's a big difference there.
Yeah.
And that he's absolutely head over heels in love with me. That was an insane, an unexpected, exponential flip of the coin. And that started my healing journey. And what the kingpin to that weekend was that I finally owned my story. I was been in denial about my story going up to that point. I didn't like it. I hated my story. I was in denial. And that weekend, I came face to face with my story. I had to grieve my story, and that became another process. Like I said, there's a lot of loss in it. The next year at retreat, that grieving happened. And I had at both those retreats, I had something what I called my sacred moment of release, where all the emotions that I've been holding on for I don't know how many years came out. One of my biggest fears was that I would cry and not be able to stop.
Mm.
I cried, and I heavy cried, like heavy heaving, crying for 10 or 15 minutes, because my story was worth that much grief. It was worthy of being grieved properly. And that's what it deserved. But here it is. I stopped crying. And as I let that go, that made room then for the healing to start. Those are the first step started in the 80s when I told somebody. And then in 2014, when I owned my story, and then I started grieving my story. And then where things started to really turn for me was that following year in 2016, when I dared to believe that I mattered. It's one thing to own your story. It's another to grieve it, but then to realize that it can then be used as a springboard was where the light switch came on. And that's where the healing really started taking off, because I dared to believe that I could make a difference. And even though there's a lot of tapes telling me otherwise, I still dared to believe. Because when someone dares you, they're asking you to take a risk. They're asking you to step out of your comfort zone and do or believe or say something that maybe you don't even buy into just yet, but they're saying, take that risk anyway. And when I started living in that world, that's when things started to change. The healing continued over a course of time. But I can say now that, and this is what I'm going to say sounds weird. And it's not where every survivor gets to. And it's only by the grace of God I've gotten to this point. But I actually have compassion on the boy who raped me, because in the 70s, rape was not on the radar. It wasn't something to be discussed. It was perfectly safe to walk to school and nobody thought a thing about it. But so if it was off the radar for me, it should have been off the radar for my rapist. And what was going on in his life, God forbid, what was he experiencing or being exposed to that led him to acting out like that? Not everybody gets to that point, and that is fine. Each journey is individual. For me, that's the point I have gotten to. Does not let him off the hook. I have forgiven him. And it took a long time to be able to look in the mirror and say to myself, the rape was not my fault, because I had all those tapes going on. Everything that a survivor goes through for an event that happened a month ago or yesterday, I went through 40 years later, on top of 40 years of life. So it was not a journey for the faint of heart, but I am here to say it's possible. No matter what has happened, no matter how long it has been, it is possible, and you are worthy of healing, and your story is worth being told. And that's the message I want to get out now, that I am to the point where I can speak about it this way.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
No, I think I can say that my mom and I both are still going through that healing journey of what both of us went through. Because I went through it at a young age and she did as well. And that healing process, it takes a long time. I still haven't gotten to where I can fully think about it, because there's parts that I didn't realize that I had blocked out about certain situations.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden I'm wondering, why am I so upset with this other person and triggered for no reason, to where I'm shaking and really, really upset when I shouldn't be.
Yep.
And it's getting to that process of, okay, maybe it's a trigger because of something that happened. It's not necessarily that person, it's what I went through before. And that, like you said, that fight and flight, I'm pretty sure I've lived majority of my life, even to this day, in that fight or flight mode.
Mm,
Even my mom, she still lives in that fight or flight mode. We're always waiting for the worst to happen.
Yeah.
yep. Yep. I understand that. I understand that.
It's
It's not a
tough.
journey for the faint of heart, but
No.
it's also
Mm-mm.
one that if as you surround yourself with people who believe in you, that makes all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world.
Yeah. And I think before we go to this next question, I think the fact that my daughter and I have experienced so much of the same things, not so much together, but at different times,
Mhm.
that is what makes our bond unique and also strong, because we can talk about these things to each other. And I think that that's so important, is that you have someone that you can talk to,
Right.
someone that you can trust,
Mhm.
someone that's going to um, be that listener, but also be that comforter, that you know that you can truly embrace, and they can embrace you in a safe mode. And
Right.
that is what's so important, having that safe mode. Because when you're in that fight or flight mode, you have the tendency to still put it up that defense.
Mhm.
No matter if you know that person truly loves you, like you say, and accepts you as who you are. Um, and I think that's what's so important about being a Christian, is having that relationship with God,
Mhm.
to know that no matter what you've been through, no matter what you're experiencing, you're loved, you're wanted, you're special, and through it all, you're going to be okay.
Mhm.
It may take time, it will take time to heal, but you're going to be okay.
Right.
In saying that, you've battled different obstacles. You've been able to um, battle one that I think a lot of us deal with, when it comes to the weight.
Mhm.
Because once you go through an ordeal like this, your food is that comforter. It's the stuff that's in the chemicals that's in the food,
Mhm.
that gives you that secure, that feeling, that love, that where you also use it as a defense mechanism.
Mhm.
You feel that the more you eat would deter people from you that have hurt you.
Mm.
But I'm going to let you take it from there, sir.
Yeah, and if I can back up real quick, I commented earlier, I was been suicidal twice. The second time, to your point about having that relationship with Christ, the second time I was suicidal was when my folks were divorcing, and I was imploding again because, again, this is back in the 90s now, and I still didn't know how to deal with emotions. So I was dealing with them in every unhealthy way you can imagine, and that included losing weight again. And I was just imploding. I was not doing well. I was just tail spinning. And there were only two thoughts keeping me alive at that point. I was rational enough to know my family didn't need to go to my funeral in the middle of the divorce. And I was thankful for that thought. But then even the greater thought was there was a nagging optimism that would not let me go. And that was my relationship with Christ. It wasn't letting me go. So to that point, that is why I am here. Left to myself, I wouldn't be here. But that would not let me go. And because God could see where it was going to go. Yeah, about the eating disorders. There is a lot of misinformation out there about eating disorders. And one of my purposes when I speak is to educate about them and educate through sharing my story, but then also kind of just giving some general information about it. First of all, there is no look to an eating disorder. If I did not tell people that I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, it probably wouldn't even cross their mind. But what I can say is that the eating disorder that I am in recovery from is called OSFED, other specified feeding and eating disorder. There's anorexia, there's bulimia, there's overeating or binge eating is what it's called. There's OSFED, and there are probably about a dozen other eating disorders. Now, some of them are in the DSM, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual that the medical field uses for diagnoses. There are others as well that people in the mental health field acknowledge and identify with, even if they're not in the DSM yet. But an eating disorder really has nothing to do with food. Absolutely nothing to do with food. It's an addiction. In the same way, it's an addictive personality that may come out through alcohol addiction or porn addiction or drug addiction or anything like that. In this case, it comes out through food. And the difference is that in every other addiction, recovery requires you to abstain and to stay away from.
Yeah.
In an eating disorder, you have to face the issue. You have to face food. Now, again, food is not the issue. You have to face the issue so that you can deal with the food. Eating disorders have to do with emotions that haven't been dealt with in some way from whatever, usually some type of underlying trauma or unresolved issue. In my case, it was a lot of underlying issues. It comes out through food in whatever aspect that takes. For me, OSFED means that I don't fit the diagnostic criteria for any other eating disorder, but I have disordered eating. I don't fit the diagnostic criteria for anorexia because I didn't have the severe weight loss, or I didn't have this symptom or that symptom that you had to check off the boxes, but I still had a big issue. And what I have learned is that, back up, for me, it came out through the eating disorder because I got uncomfortable in front of people. Our bodies are designed by God to need carbs, fats, and proteins. And when I speak, I get on a little bit of a soapbox, and I give the forewarning it's going to be a soapbox because I have a real problem with diet culture. Because diet culture is based on restriction and denial. And if we are trying to honor our bodies for how God designed them to be, why on God's green earth would we deny it what he designed it to need? So instead of cutting out this or limiting this or anything, a balanced meal plan on a consistent basis allows your metabolism over time to regulate itself. And then the body settles in at what is called a set weight. My set weight is much more than I thought that I could handle. And I don't talk numbers when I talk about this. I don't talk weight ranges. But what I will say is that I didn't think I would, it wasn't in my mind. I'll put it that way. Okay. But what I have learned is that when I eat in a consistent way, a balance of carbs, fats, and proteins each day, 3 times a day, my body has come to trust me that I'm going to take care of it. When I first went into recovery from my eating disorder, I was working with my dietitian. I had to learn to eat. And that may sound really crazy, but I had shut off my hunger cues and I had learned to snack when I got hungry. So therefore, I was eating maybe a meal a day, maybe. And over a weekend, maybe 2 meals in an entire weekend. So I was not well at all. And my homework the first week was simply when you're hungry, eat, because she wanted me to just learn how to start listening to my body. And then we had a meal plan and we focused on just breakfast. It was, okay, just eat your exchanges for breakfast. And my meal plan works off of the diabetic exchange system, which is a certain amount of servings of carbs, fat, and proteins per meal based on serving size and what the food label says and everything. So like I said, I had to relearn how to eat. When I first started that, I felt a change in my body. I did not like the bloated feeling. And I talked with her about it because it was kind of freaking me out. And I was angry. I'm like, I don't want to gain. I don't want to do this, you know? And what she helped me understand is that right now, Sue, because you have denied your body what it needs, what it is designed to need, You are giving it something and it's hoarding it right now, because right now it doesn't know when you're going to give it to it again.
Mhm.
She said, stick with it. And as your body learns to trust you, it will regulate. And it did. I don't have those bloated feelings anymore that used to drive me absolutely nutty.
Hmm.
Recovery for an eating disorder is multifaceted. I have my counselor. I have a dietitian. My family doctor knows about my eating disorder as well. For me, I've not haven't had to be on medication. Usually with an eating disorder, there is some other what they call comorbid
Mhm.
diagnoses, depression, anxiety, whatever. For me, it was PTSD and depression. But I have not had to be on medication. But sometimes that is involved, and you might need to have a psychiatrist involved. So what I can say is that eating disorder recovery takes a team approach,
Mhm.
and it's not easy. You are retraining your brain to do exactly what you've been doing the opposite of. For me, I still remember the day in particular after I'd been eating my exchanges for a while. I was at the office, and one of my triggers, one of my red flags would be if I reach in the look in the refrigerator, get overwhelmed with food choices, shut the door, I'm like, forget it, I'll just go snack. And my dietitian kept telling me, that's your eating disorder voice, that's not you. And she'd said that for a long time. And she was helping me understand that I am not my eating disorder. Because when you're in an addiction, you tend to fuse your identity with that. You tend to say, I have an eating disorder, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, whatever.
Mhm.
But they are separate. And what she helped me realize as we separated those out. So I gave my eating disorder a name. I named it Ed. And as I started becoming aware of the eating disorder whispers, not loud enough for everybody else to hear, but I would talk out loud. And I say, Ed, shut up. Ed, shut up. And then the key to recovery is do exactly the opposite of what your eating disorder voice is telling you to do. So when I would shut the refrigerator door and want to get out of Dodge, I'd stop, Ed, shut up, and I'd make myself go make a food choice. But I know, but there was one day in particular where I literally felt like my brain was splitting because it started seeing things more clearly. The fog that was there because I had been denying it the carbs and everything that it needed cleared up. And that started making it so much easier. So, I could talk a long time about eating disorders. I actually have a whole presentation I do about them, but they are not for the faint of heart. And here's the thing. Eating disorders are the second most lethal of all mental health issues. And a lot of people don't realize that. It used to be number one. It is now number two, second only to opioid addiction. And that is only a recent change in the last year or two. They are that lethal, not only because of the suicide involved, but also because of the damage that we do to our bodies over time. Those are just a couple of things I like to highlight when we talk about eating disorders, because people don't understand how deadly they are. And they have absolutely nothing to do with weight and nothing to do with food. It's just the embodiment of what's going on inside the body coming out, inside the mind coming out.
Well, we have to have you back to definitely dig into that, because there's so much to that. So much.
I'd love to.
How can our viewers and watchers who are also struggling with day to day and their past and their journey and their mental health and challenges that they have get in contact with you?
Best place is at SueBowles.com. I've got a bunch of information there. I'm, as she said before, I'm a master certified life coach. So if there's something I can do to help one of your listeners, please reach out to me there. We can get in touch and see how I can help you best. But that's your best place. I am on social media. I'm on Instagram as My Step Ahead, which is my business name. I'm on Facebook as Sue Bowles Coaching and My Step Ahead, and Twitter, and I'm launching a YouTube channel. So they'll find me.
All right.
I want to thank you so much for joining us and telling us your story and giving even us more information and encouragement as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming back so we can
Yes.
dig in a little more.
Yes.
Yes, for sure.
And to our watchers and listeners, please don't forget to follow us on our social media outlets. Also, please don't forget to click that like and subscribe button, as we don't want you to miss out on our special guests and our great topics. And we want to thank you for tuning in.